"You have influence," Stephen said. "I have money," Livia replied. "They obey it more honestly than they obey prayer." The fire cracked softly. Outside, distant voices moved like a restless tide. The town never truly slept when sickness lived within it. Stephen thought of Sarah in the laboratory, standing watch beside the quarantined man. He thought of the fevered patient upstairs, breathing in a room that smelled clean because Livia demanded it. He thought of how many others might be suffering behind shuttered windows, waiting for fear to decide whether mercy was allowed. Isaac set his lantern down and finally let his shoulders drop a fraction. "If we are to do this," he said quietly, "we do it together." Livia's gaze sharpened. "Together is dangerous. Alone is worse," Isaac answered. Stephen nodded once. "We do not survive this by separating." Livia looked at them both, then gave a small, decisive nod. "Then you will have rooms," she said, "and you will have a place to speak and plan. You will not drag your work into my halls, but you will bring your minds into them. That is what I can offer." The quiet warmth of the room made it almost possible to believe the night could be held outside. Almost. The mansion had thick walls, but it could not erase the sound of a frightened town. The bell had stopped for now, yet its echo lingered in memory like a bruise. Then there was banging at the front door. All three turned at once. The sound struck hard and urgent, not polite and not patient. Livia rose immediately, her composure sharpening into command. She crossed the hall and drew back the bolt. Cold air rushed in as the door opened to a man clutching a stack of crude posters and a bucket of paste. "By order of the council," he said breathlessly. "Every house must be warned." He slapped a poster beside the doorway and smeared paste across it with shaking hands. Dark lettering covered the page above a rough illustration that looked more like a nightmare than a drawing. A curfew. Stay inside at night. Do not walk near the tree line. His voice dropped lower, and the fear in it turned the words into something heavier than ink. "Something attacked a man beyond the outer cottages," he said. "Tore him open like an animal. Another was bitten. They say it runs on 2 legs, but moves like a dog." He swallowed hard. "People are calling it the Dog Man." Behind him, the street held a restless hush, the kind that formed when people tried not to speak their terror too loudly. Far away, the bell rang once, slow and hollow. Livia did not step back. She held the doorway as if her body alone could keep the night from entering. "Finish your work," she told him, "then get inside before they close the gates." The man did not need to be told twice. He hurried away into the dark, paste bucket swinging at his side. Livia closed the door and set the bolt in place. The sound echoed deeper than before, like a lock on a coffin. She turned back to Isaac and Stephen. Her eyes held no panic, only calculation and the tired acceptance that danger never waited for permission. "No rest for the weary," she said quietly. Outside, shutters tightened. Inside, the fire continued to burn, and the night pressed close against the glass. Chapter 9. When the night begins to hunt. Isaac did not wait for the fire to settle or the quiet of the mansion to soften the warning nailed beside the door. The moment the messenger's footsteps faded into the dark, his attention had already turned elsewhere, pulled by a responsibility that lived beyond warm walls and guarded rooms. Sarah was alone in the laboratory. The quarantined man still balanced between breath and silence. Night had fallen, and night changed everything. "You should remain here until morning," Livia said, her voice steady but low. "The streets are no longer safe." Isaac shook his head before she finished speaking. "I cannot leave her there alone, not with sickness in the rooms and fear in the town." He lifted the lantern from the table and tightened his grip around its handle. "If something worsens, she will face it by herself. I will not allow that." Livia studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod that held neither blame nor approval, only understanding. "Then go carefully," she said, "and return when the sun allows it." Isaac inclined his head once to her, once to Stephen. "Before dawn," he said, though his tone carried the knowledge that dawn did not always answer promises. Then he stepped into the corridor and out into the night, closing the door softly behind him, as if sound alone might draw danger closer. The bolt slid back into place with a dull iron echo. Silence returned to the mansion, but it was not the same silence as before. This one listened. Stephen's attention had already shifted upward. The fevered man remained the first battle he had fought in this town, the first proof that suffering here still obeyed the rules of flesh and blood. He moved toward the staircase without speaking, and Livia followed with a candle held high enough to push shadows back from the walls. The room upstairs smelled cleaner than sickness usually allowed. Fresh cloth, cool water, air drawn through a narrow window and guided across the bed. The man lying there no longer thrashed in restless fever. His skin, though still warm, had lost the violent heat that once burned through Stephen's fingers. Sweat dampened his brow, but it was the sweat of a body releasing strain rather than drowning in it. His breathing had changed, still weak, but deeper, more certain. Stephen stepped close and rested his hand lightly against the man's chest, counting the rise and fall, slower than before. No frantic struggle, no wet, choking pull for air. The pulse at the throat no longer fled beneath his fingers. It held steady, fragile but present, like a thread that had finally stopped fraying. He spoke again. Livia whispered, not clearly, but he knew where he was. Stephen nodded. The fever is breaking. The words did not ring like triumph. They settled quietly into the room, gentle as the cooling air, yet their meaning carried weight enough to change the night. He will live? Livia asked. If nothing new takes him, Stephen said. Yes, by morning he may stand. For the first time since he had entered her house, Livia's shoulders lowered the smallest fraction. Not relief, not peace. Only the easing of a grip held too long. Then something in this world still listens, she said softly. Stephen did not answer. He simply adjusted the cloth at the man's neck and ensured the water beside the bed remained clean. Victory in medicine was never loud. It was measured in breaths that continued when they should have stopped. Downstairs, the fire had settled into low red coals. The mansion held a fragile calm, the kind that exists only when danger has not yet reached the door. Livia placed another log on the embers, and flame rose slowly, painting the room in warmer light. You have given this house something it has not felt in a long time, she said. Uncertainty, Stephen replied. Possibility. The word lingered between them, delicate as glass. Before either could speak again, a scream tore through the night outside. It came from far down the street, thin with distance, yet sharp with terror. Another followed, closer, breaking into ragged sobbing before cutting off abruptly. The silence after felt heavier than the sound itself. Stephen was already at the window. Lantern light flickered in scattered houses. Shadows moved where no one should be walking. Somewhere beyond the last row of buildings, near the black line of trees, something shifted too quickly to follow. Then came the barking of a dog. One sharp sound. Half of another. Silence. Livia's hand tightened against the back of a chair. It has begun. Footsteps pounded somewhere outside the gates of the property. Not the steady rhythm of travel, the uneven crash of someone fleeing. A shape stumbled into the dim edge of lantern glow beyond the fence, clutching one arm tight against the chest. A voice broke loose from the dark. Help me, please. The cry cracked into pain. Stephen moved toward the door, every instinct sharpened by the sound alone. Blood loss, shock, time closing. Livia followed, her face pale but unflinching. The pounding on the door came next. Hard, desperate, human. Stephen listened first. One man. No second set of steps close behind. Breath tearing in and out of damaged lungs. Who is there? Livia called. Tomas, the voice gasped. It took him. God help me. It bit me. Stephen's jaw tightened. He motioned for the window. Livia pulled the curtain aside just enough to see. Lantern light revealed torn flesh from shoulder to elbow. Deep punctures. Blood running in slow, heavy lines toward trembling fingers. Not clean wounds. Ragged. Violent. Already swelling. Alive. But not safe. He must go to the laboratory, Stephen said quietly. Not inside this house. Another sound drifted from the distant dark. Low. Broken. Breath forced through a throat that no longer shaped it properly. Tomas heard it too. His sobbing rose into raw panic. Please, don't leave me out here. Stephen drew back the bolt. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of iron and damp earth. Tomas swayed on the threshold, eyes wide with the stunned disbelief of someone who had seen death choose another man first. Stephen caught his shoulder and steadied him. You will walk, he said calmly. We are going to the laboratory. Behind Tomas, the darkness near the tree line shifted again, low to the ground. Too fast to follow. Gone before certainty could form. Stephen did not chase the movement with his eyes. The living man in front of him mattered more than the unseen thing in the dark. "Move," he said gently. Tomas stumbled forward, leaving a thin trail of blood across the stone. Livia stood in the doorway, watching them step into the night. Fear lived in her eyes, but it did not control her. She held the lantern high, giving them light enough to reach the gate. "Bring him back alive," she said. Stephen did not promise. He simply walked. Behind them, the mansion door closed. Ahead of them, the road to the laboratory disappeared into shadow, and somewhere beyond the reach of lantern light, the night kept breathing. Chapter 10. The Road to the Laboratory. The night swallowed them the moment the mansion door shut. Lantern light shrank to a small circle that trembled with every step, and beyond it, the town became a shape made of breath and smoke. Stephen kept Tomas close, one hand ready near the torn arm, the other holding the lantern high enough to catch the glint of wet cobblestone and the dark mouths of alleyways. The laboratory was blocks away, but in a town like this, distance meant nothing. Danger did not need long roads. It only needed darkness. Tomas walked like a man who had already left part of himself behind. His injured arm was clamped against his chest, blood seeping through his sleeve in slow, heavy pulses. His eyes darted constantly, scanning the street behind them as if the shadows had followed them from the trees. He kept whispering in fragments, half prayers and half-broken sentences, words that collapsed before they reached meaning. A few steps later, Tomas began to talk louder, then wrong. His voice shifted, thickened by panic and something else that did not sound like fear. He laughed once, abruptly, with no humor in it. He spoke again, and the words came out tangled, slurred, as if his tongue could not remember its job. His head twitched in small, sharp motions, like a body trying to shake off an invisible hand. Stephen slowed and watched him closely. He had seen delirium before. He had seen shock. He had seen a mind drown inside fever. This was different. Tomas's eyes did not drift. They snapped, focused too hard, then unfocused again, as if attention itself had become a weapon that turned randomly in the dark. Tomas stopped walking. For one breath, he stood perfectly still, swaying slightly, as if the street beneath him had begun to move. Then his jaw worked strangely, and a thin line of saliva slipped from the corner of his mouth. He wiped at it with his good hand, but more followed. His lips trembled. His throat flexed in a swallow that did not go down right, and a wet sound crawled up behind his teeth. Stephen stepped closer. "Tomas, look at me." Tomas's eyes locked onto Stephen with sudden intensity. His pupils looked too wide in the lantern light. His breathing grew fast and shallow, and the skin at his neck tightened as if something inside him was pulling it from beneath. Then Tomas made a sound that might have been a cough, except it came out like choking. Foam gathered at his lips. At first it was pale and thin, almost harmless looking. Then it thickened, clinging to his mouth in strings. A darker color seeped into it, a rusty smear that turned the foam into something dirtier, heavier. Tomas's face contorted, not in pain exactly, but in a loss of control that looked like pain from the outside. His body seized. It did not look like a man fainting. It looked like something yanking his muscles by force. Tomas's arms jerked, his spine bowed, and his legs struck the ground in violent, uneven motions. His teeth clacked hard enough that Stephen heard it over his own breathing. Foam and blood dripped down Tomas's chin and onto his chest, and the lantern light caught it in brief flashes like wet paint. Stephen backed one step, then another, because instinct told him to, because the body in front of him no longer moved like a man who could be calmed by voice. The seizure broke into a terrible rhythm, fast, then slower, then fast again, as if the muscles were firing out of order. Tomas's eyes rolled back, then snapped forward again, wide and glassy. His throat made a strangled sound that was not a word. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Tomas stood still, chest heaving, arms hanging, head bowed. For a breath, it looked as if the storm inside him had passed. He lifted his face. Bloody foam clung around his mouth and down his chin. His eyes found Stephen with a dead clarity that did not match what was left of his mind. The air between them tightened, as if the street itself understood what was coming. Tomas opened his mouth. The sound that came out was not a scream in the way a man screams. It was a raw, torn roar that felt too large for the human throat making it. It hit Stephen in the chest like a physical blow. It carried hunger, pain, and something empty behind both, something that did not recognize mercy. Tomas lunged. Stephen moved on pure reflex. He turned and ran, boots striking stone hard enough to jar his bones. The lantern swung wildly, throwing light across walls and shuttered windows and the pale blur of smoke in the street. Behind him, Tomas's footsteps hammered the road with brutal speed, not limping, not weakened, faster than he should have been, as if whatever had taken him did not understand the concept of exhaustion. Stephen ran harder. The laboratory was still too far, the street narrowed, the lantern light bounced and blurred, his breath burned his throat. Behind him the pursuit did not slow. Tomas closed distance in savage bursts, breath ragged and loud, the sound of an animal chasing prey that had nowhere to go. A woman stepped into the street ahead, carrying a small basket, drawn by noise and confusion. She saw Stephen first, then the thing chasing him, and her face changed so fast it looked like it cracked. Her basket fell. Something inside shattered against stone. She screamed. Stephen tried to shout a warning, but his lungs failed him. His foot caught on uneven cobblestone and he went down hard, shoulder striking ground, lantern skidding and rolling. Pain flared across his ribs and forearm. He turned just enough to see Tomas stop for half a heartbeat, head snapping toward the woman, as if her scream had pulled a leash. Tomas changed direction instantly. He hit her like a collision. His hands clamped onto her shoulders and he drove her backward, slamming her into the wall with enough force to shake dust from the timber. She fought, claws out, screaming again, but Tomas did not hesitate. He bit into her with ugly violence, head jerking as teeth tore and released and tore again. His hands raked at her face and neck, dragging nails through skin, leaving wet red trails that opened wider with each frantic movement. The woman's screams changed. They broke into choking sounds, high and broken, then lower as breath failed her. Blood slicked the front of her dress. Her hands flailed and struck Tomas's head and shoulders with desperate strength. He answered with more biting, more tearing, his body moving with a relentless rhythm that was not human rage but something worse, something mechanical in its devotion to harm. Stephen stayed on the ground, stunned, trying to force air back into his lungs, trying to make his muscles obey. His mind kept trying to name what he was seeing and failing. The violence was too fast, too total. The woman's movements slowed, then stuttered, then slowed again. Her body sagged against the wall, leaving smeared streaks behind her like paint dragged by a dying hand. A man stepped out of the darkness. He moved with a hard confidence, the kind built from surviving nights like this. In each hand he held a revolver. He did not shout. He did not hesitate. He raised one gun and fired once into Tomas's back. The shot cracked through the street. Tomas lurched forward, body jerking at the impact. For a fraction of a second, Stephen thought it would end there. Then Tomas straightened with a sudden, unnatural speed and turned toward the shooter, foam and blood hanging from his mouth. He released another roar, lower than before, thick with fury. He charged. The man fired again, then again. One shot struck Tomas in the chest, another hit the leg, another tore through the arm. Tomas stumbled but did not fall. He kept coming, faster now, as if pain had become fuel. The shooter stepped back, steadying his aim in the lantern light, and fired one final time. The bullet struck Tomas in the forehead. Tomas's body snapped backward and hit the ground with a heavy final sound. His limbs twitched once, then went still. The street fell quiet except for the wet drip of blood onto stone and the shallow, terrible breathing of the woman dying against the wall. The man ran to her first. He knelt, hands hovering, then freezing when he saw her eyes. They were open but empty. Blood bubbled at her lips in small bursts as her chest tried to take breath it could no longer hold. Her fingers jerked once, twice, then slowed. "She is gone," the man said, voice tight. He rose and turned to Stephen, who was pushing himself up with shaking arms. The man's eyes moved quickly over Stephen's body, checking for injuries the way a soldier checks for holes in armor. "Are you hit?" the man asked. "I fell," Stephen said, voice raw. "I am alive." Stephen looked back at the woman. The last movement left her hand, and the street felt colder for it. He forced himself to stand fully, pain grinding in his side. Then he looked at Tomas's body on the ground, the foam, the blood, the ruined arm. "Is he dead?" Stephen asked. The man glanced down at the forehead wound and nodded once. One through the eyes. Dead. Stephen swallowed hard. "We have to take him to the laboratory." The man stared at him as if he had misheard. "You are not dragging that thing anywhere. Let the council burn it." "We need answers," Stephen said. "If this spreads, it will not stop at one street. It will take the whole town." The man's jaw tightened. He looked once at the dead woman, then at the dead attacker, then at Stephen's face. Whatever he saw there made him curse under his breath. "I am not touching his mouth," he said, "or his hands." "Do not," Stephen replied. "Help me move him by the legs and shoulders. Keep distance from his face." The man hesitated one last moment, then holstered one revolver and grabbed Tomas by the ankles. Stephen took the shoulders, gripping cloth, not skin, dragging the body across cobblestone. The head rolled with the motion, foam streaking the stone in pale lines that caught lantern light in brief flashes. They moved fast, not running, dragging. The dead weight fought every inch. Stephen's ribs screamed with pain. The man kept glancing into the dark, revolver raised again, expecting something else to charge out of it. The street remained silent except for the scrape of the corpse and the ragged breathing of two living men hauling death through town. The laboratory door appeared ahead like a shape carved from shadow. Stephen hit it with his fist hard enough to sting. "Isaac, open." For a moment nothing moved. Then the door cracked, lantern light spilling out. Isaac Tesla stood there, eyes widening as he took in the scene. Blood, foam, the corpse dragging lines across his threshold, Stephen's face pale and streaked. "What is this?" Isaac asked, voice tightening. Stephen's breath came in rough pulls. He forced the words out anyway because someone had to say them, because the truth had stepped into the streets and refused to leave. "Death," Stephen said. "Death has just reached this town."